Magandang gabi po sa ating lahat. Isang makakalikasang gabi. Isang maalab na pagbati mula sa inyong kaugnay, kapusod at karugtong. Ako po ang inyong lingkod, si Rodne Galicha. Sa ating mga katutubo, isang pagkilala at parangal sa inyong patuloy na pagpapanatili ng balanse, dignidad at integridad ng kalikasan. Dito sa hashtag Cutie Earth, everything matters dahil ang lahat ay magkaugnay, hindi magkakahiwalay dahil ang ating buhay, kalikasan ang pinagmulan at pinagkukunan ng ating kabuhayan. Tayo at ang kapaligiran ay iisa. Tayo ay kalikasan. Sa hashtag Cutie Earth, hashtag We Are Nature. Ano ang kanyang nararamdaman? Ang nararamdaman ng kanyang puso? Ano ang kanyang tinitibok? Hashtag Earth Beats. Hashtag Earth Beats. Belief, emotion, action, thought. Beats. Hashtag Earth Beats. I come from a small island in the middle of the Philippines, where the world's densest forest flourishes, the majestic Mount Giting-Giting dwells, and one of the country's cleanest inland body of water flows, Cantingas River, where you can swim with the fish and drink the water where you swam. As we continue to protect our watersheds from mining, Cantingas River becomes the 100% main source of our electricity for almost 70,000 islanders through a mini hydropower system. I came from that island of Sibuyan, where our indigenous peoples called Sibuyan, Mangyan, Tagabukid continue to live sustainably in harmony with nature. I was formed in a university where veritas, truth, must always be promoted at all times. In today's context, to recognize the truth that in unity, faith, hope, and love, we are called to be stewards, to bring back the real meaning of economy, which is not about law of supply and demand, profits, investments, and gains. Our mission, accept that economy comes from oikos, or household, nature, where we come from, and nomos, or management, or stewardship. At mga kababayan, may mga naninindigan, maraming tinatakot, ang iba naman ay being killed to their last hininga, they fight. Dito sa hashtag Earth Heroes. Hashtag Earth Heroes. Isang kaibigan, isang katrabaho, mga kapatid, si Ginoong Armin Rios Marin, Martir, Bayani.
Armin lived by the mantra, dying in battle is better than living in oppression. Armin was a tireless, incorruptible campaigner for the environment in his hometown of Sibuyan, Romblon, until his fearless activism cost him his life. Armin was born and raised in Sibuyan, an island with unique biodiversity and geography that it is considered by some to be Asia's Galapagos. Armin dedicated his life in protecting the island against destructive mining. Even if he served as a town councilor, he listened more to the voices of the constituents rather than just following orders from the higher local government units. He joined the people in the streets in opposing the formation and subsequent activities of consortiums of mining companies. Tragically, at a particular violent protest against mining companies, he was dragged away and fatally shot. The assailant was the head of the security team employed by mining consortium Sibuyan Nickel Property Development Corporation. Armin's family and supporters hope that his death will give life to others, life to battles that need fighting, life to people who need empowerment, and life to national struggles that need attention.
Si Manong Armin po ay pinaslang noong October 3, 2007. At sa ngayon, siya ay isang bayani doon sa aming isla ng Sibuyan sa lalawigan ng Romblon. Siya po ay pinarangalan ng Gawad Bayani ng Kalikasan ng Center for Environmental Concerns noong 2013. At syempre po mga kapusod at mga karugton, may mga naninindigan tulad ni Manong Armin, may mga bayaning patuloy na kumikilos para sa lupang hinirang, ang ating inang Pilipinas at para sa whole planet. At upang makilala siya at talakayin ang bituin at araw niya, kailanpama'y di magdidilim. Samahan natin siya sa episode 8 ng Cutie Earth dito sa #Earth Talks. Well, isang young scientist, isang youth leader, isang journalist. Kakaiba? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my colleague, JOHN LEO Algo, or we can call him JL. JL.
Magandang gabi po, Sir Rodney, at magandang gabi sa lahat na nakikinig sa Cutie Earth.
Maraming salamat, JL, sa pagsama dito sa ating programang #Cutie Earth. At syempre, diretso na tayo. JL, si JL po ay matagal ko na rin kasama, pero first time kami magkakasama ngayon sa isang online na programa, lalong-lalo na dito sa Current Talk Media, no? JL, at syempre, unang tanong ko sa iyo, ano ang unang nararamdaman mo kung maririnig mo ang sa lupang hinirang o kung aawitin mo ang bituin at araw niya, kailanpama'y di magdidilim?
When I hear that line in our national anthem, of course I feel a sense of pride. Of course, whenever you sing our national anthem, and in my opinion, our national anthem is probably one of the most beautiful written national anthems. Like you can sense it when you hear in the Olympics, for example, you hear the national anthems of other countries, and then you hear our national anthem, and you can't help but feel a sense of pride, a sense of hope in that part, in all of the lines, quite frankly. Pero dun po sa linya na, ano yun? Ang bituin at araw niya, kailanpama'y di magdidilim. It has a sense of pride, courage, hope, especially hope. Kasi nga naman, bituin at araw na kailanpama'y di magdidilim. Even in the midst of the chaos, the darkness. And everyone knows our country has been through a lot, even tracing back to centuries of history. There's always a sense of hope, a sense of resilience. Ayan, that term resilience that we keep hearing almost every single day now, whether in the context of climate change, disasters, or whether with the pandemic. Yung pagiging resilient ng Pilipino, yung ating pagiging our ability to rise back up, build back better from calamities, catastrophes, any kind of basically danger that you can think of. To me, that's what that line symbolizes: resilience and hope for Filipinos.
Wow. Interesting. Nakakaantig ng damdamin. JL, yes, resiliency, rising back, pagbangon. Ang bituin at araw niya, kailanpama'y di magdidilim. With your work and with your advocacy on the environment, on social issues, paano natin magagamit ang ningning at impluwensya natin upang maitaguyod ang kapakanan ng ating kalikasan, maitaguyod ang karapatang pangtao, ang ating responsibilidad sa lipunan, social responsibility, lalo na sa ating mga kabataan at tahanan bilang isang youth leader?
Well, I think it starts with us being living examples. We need to be able to walk the talk, kumbaga. Siyempre tayong, of course, you, sir, you've been in this environmental advocacy for a long time now. And compared to me, I'm just getting started, basically. Even though I've been in this advocacy in climate and environmental action for, I don't know, 5 years now, solid. And if we count my college days, nag-aaral pa ako ng environmental science back in Ateneo. Let's say 11 years. I've always been in the environmental world in one way or another. But every single time that we, or at least from my experience, every single time that I engage in talks, when I write my op-eds, or write or do research, quite frankly, it's still a different experience because our environmental advocacy is something that also changes with the times. And the ability for us to walk the talk, that kind of dynamic makes it even more challenging as well. Because whether we like it or not, for example, tayo, nasa loob tayo ng sistema. It's hard for us to break away from the system when, at least within our own personal lives, our personal spaces. Sometimes, of course, philosophically speaking, we can say we always have a choice. But in our case, because we're trying to live to be more efficient, a fast-paced lifestyle, especially here in the city, it's hard to keep up with. It's hard to be at least 100% hardcore environmentally friendly talaga. And for example, sa bahay natin, kung wala tayong solar panel sa mga bahay natin ngayon, and many of us do not, and whether kung gugustuhin man natin, for example, wala tayong pera, and saan manggagaling kuryente natin? It has to come from, of course, the distribution. It has to come from the current power plants that are subjected through distribution utilities. And unfortunately, dito sa ating bansa, dominated pa rin ng fossil fuels, especially coal, ang ating kuryente, ang supply ng kuryente. So in that sense, we can say that, we are fighting for the environment. We want to phase out fossil fuels. But if our systems still favor dirty energy that pollutes the planet, that accelerates the warming of the planet, then does that mean we're complicit? Does that mean that we are hypocrites? Well, personally, I don't think that's the case. That we are necessarily hypocrites for being within the system, because, in my opinion, for us to be able to walk the talk, we have to know what the system is that we're living in. Kailangan alam natin yung problema, yung mga challenges na nasa loob ng sistema na gusto nating baguhin. And in the case of the environment, in the case of climate action, napakahirap na baguhin yung sistema. Especially considering na, sabihin natin sa Pilipinas, mataas ang awareness natin sa climate change. Compared to other countries, that may be true. Pero kung titignan natin on the ground level, marami pa rin ang hindi nakakaalam talaga ng totoong definisyon ng realidad na konektado sa pagbabago ng klima. So, since you mentioned households, individuals, that brings us to another issue naman. Sino ba talaga ang dapat umaksyon? Large scale or on the ground level? Should we focus on small-scale solutions or the big-picture solutions? Siyempre, maraming magsasabi na dapat mag-focus tayo sa small-scale solutions. Maghihintay na lang ba tayo na magbago yung sistema na napakatagal bago magbago yan? Unless we really push for it, and we should. But before I go there, let's go back to my original point. Hintayin po ba natin na may umaksyon bago tayo mismo umaksyon? So in our own little ways, we can start by, avoiding wasteful consumptions. Basically, the things that our parents, teachers have always been telling us since we were kids. Magtipid, wag magaksaya, magalit ang, maraming magagalit and all that. But at the same time, over the last few weeks especially as after I watched this documentary, it's called The Story of Plastic. I realized even more strongly than ever that the corporations that are responsible, quite frankly, for the pollution, the plastic pollution, the global warming pollution, their marketing, their communication strategies to be fair, are really that good that they can deflect the blame to pass it on to consumers, despite them controlling the supply, the distribution of the products that consumers really need to live the modern fast-paced lifestyle. And therefore, and that's the brilliance of it. They keep the profits and almost, well, they get the blame, but is anyone really enforcing the blame on them? Are they really getting penalized for it? Some of them may be, but nowhere near enough.
Does that mean
So-
that in order for us or for the young people to keep the fire burning so that darkness won't reign, it means that even if you're small, even if your number is quite very, at the minimum, or your power compared to corporations, if you will collect all those efforts, you can keep the fire burning and actually can make a change.
Absolutely. It's basically the ripple effect. And in connection to that, since we are in QT Earth after all, I would like to bring up another, at least personal philosophy that I try to live by mostly these days. And that is that the strongest, the most resilient of systems are the ones with the most diversity. And especially in this world that we're living in right now, na maraming sources of information, that where there are many sectors, especially amongst the youth, for example, with many interests, many backgrounds. Some of them may have already the means at a young age to start enterprises that could really make a difference in their communities. And then there are others who just want to graduate, finish school. That doesn't mean that they cannot, that does not mean that they cannot do anything either.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the brilliance of the youth of today, is that it's probably the most gifted, blessed youth ever, because all the tools are at our disposal, whether we realize it or not. It's just a matter of turning that potential energy into kinetic energy and kickstart the kind of transformation, societal transformation that is needed if we want to avoid the environmental climate crisis and all the other crises that are affecting us today.
So the young people, Filipino young people, can actually be superheroes in their own rights, in their own way. And with that, I have to ask you, sino sa palagay mo ang pinaka-earth friendly na superhero? I know the young people are superheroes in these days, and if they have the power actually to mold your future. But you have inspiration, for example, as a child before, and when you grow up, which or who is that superhero? It can be your mom or it can be your teacher. But for you, sino yung pinaka-earth friendly na superhero na talagang naka-influence sa'yo para maging isang JL ngayon?
To be honest with you, when I first heard the question, I thought we were talking about comic book superheroes. So I was thinking,
Indeed.
he could be Captain Planet. I mean, it's the most obvious answer. He's freaking Captain Planet. Of course, honorable mentions: Iron Man, Aquaman. Iron Man because renewable energy, especially in the MCU. But I digress. Well, it's interesting that you frame the question like that, because I always think that every climate advocate, every environmental, any advocate for that matter, has an origin story.
Mm-hmm.
And in my case, I would say that my origin story was Typhoon Ketsana Ondoy. When I was in college, I was just finishing my first semester in environmental science. And I was actually thinking about shifting out of my course. And I wanted to pursue law, because that was the thing I was talking about when I was a kid. And then one Saturday afternoon, well, actually it was morning, I decided to play a little bit of Grand Theft Auto. Don't judge, please. And around an hour and a half while I was, playing the game, the shop owner approached me and said that, I need to go, I need to leave. And then I asked him why. And then I looked outside, and then I saw that floods are everywhere. The floods were already so high. The computer shop was in an elevated position on the first floor of a building. But I saw the floods were so high that there is no way that I can go home anymore. And that was the beginning, just the beginning of at least a 10-hour stay outside my home, being immersed in rainfall, having to go through the floods, seeing things that no one should ever see, quite frankly. Some of them I really don't want to remember, but every time it rains, every time there's a strong rainfall, to be honest with you, it gives me flashbacks to those moments, and it still bothers me sometimes. It's that impactful of a moment. So if you want to ask me who my superhero was, I don't think there really was any superhero for me. And if you want to classify Typhoon Quetzana as some kind of a supervillain, it's not really a supervillain either, because it's just the product of hundreds of years of environmental neglect and abuse in misguided pursuit of development. So in a way, we could call ourselves as humankind, we are the bad guys in this world. And then we can call ourselves the climate environmental advocates, the superheroes of the world, because we are literally trying to save the world. But having grown up the last couple of years, I realized there are always shades of gray. And what ultimately matters to me is not whether or not we label ourselves this or that. It's probably, I think what we should really consider is doing the right thing one step at a time.
Doing the right thing one step at a time. And we all know, JL, sa iyong mga pagkilos at pakikipag-ugnayan, unti-unti kang nag-engage sa different sectors, sa mga kabataan, sa mga industry, sa academe. So, kilalanin natin ang iyong organization at ano-ano ang inyong mga pinagkakaabalahan para kay Nanay Earth. Dito sa #EarthMoves. #EarthMoves. Kasama ko si JL dito, Living Laudato Si Philippines. JL, I won't elaborate, but tell us something about our work.
Oh, for God's, I think you should do this, sir, to be honest with you. But anyway, yes, I am currently the program manager of Living Laudato Si Philippines. So Living Laudato Si Philippines began approximately, well, almost close to 2 years ago. We will have our second anniversary actually, it's exactly a month from now, if I'm not mistaken. It was born specifically to address certain needs that we thought were not being addressed within the climate movement. And of course, November 8, for those of you who may not be familiar, ito po ay ang anibersaryo ng pagtama ng isa sa mga pinakamalakas na bagyo. At sa katunayan, may tuturing na pinakamalakas na bagyo na naglandfall sa kasaysayan ng buong mundo, at least on modern record, ang Typhoon Yolanda. And Living Laudato Si Philippines was born out of desire to avoid such incidences from happening again, to promote climate justice, to listen to the cries of the earth and the poor, and to try to tackle the climate crisis in its roots. Because there are many solutions to the climate crisis. You can talk about renewable energy, absolutely. You can say small-scale solutions, behavioral changes, absolutely. Saving water and all that, yes. But from where we stand, the thing that keeps this, what is the root of the climate crisis in the first place? And we look to Pope Francis's historic landmark encyclical, the Laudato Si, for inspiration. And it is there where Pope Francis, in my opinion, perfectly captures the very reason why climate crisis has happened, and environmental crisis, social injustice, why all of these crises are happening in the first place. And that is because of what's wrong in here. Well, not necessarily me, but I'm saying humankind as a whole. And that is, we become so enamored with the concept of development and we have come to believe that we are supposed to be the overlords, the owners of the earth. We treat our planet like it's some kind of a bank where we can just withdraw and withdraw and withdraw resources for our personal gains. And look at where our world is right now. Only 100 corporations are responsible for 71% of global greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change. The disparity between the richest 1% and how much wealth they own, how much resource they control, and the state of the extremely poor communities. Certain injustices that need to be addressed. And in Living Laudato Si Philippines, we try to address this climate environmental crisis, social injustice, primarily through two different goals. So first, we try to campaign and promote divestment. So when we say divestment, we try to convince or place pressure on financial institutions, especially those corporations that are responsible for pollutions and all that, to shift away their assets, portfolios, investments, all of that away from environmentally destructive activities, especially coal. And convince them to shift these investments, these assets into something more sustainable, because that is the way that we need to go if we want our world to survive as it is, so we can change it for the better. So that's one. And second, of course, is we try to encourage different sectors to shift their lifestyles and their behaviors towards more sustainable practices. And of course, all of these are rooted, of course, by changing our behavior, faith-based, and we try to build bridges and not exactly build walls, because we also notice that there are many actions that can be done, but sometimes perhaps yung communication is not adequate, it's not appropriate, and it just encourages more people to be even more stubborn and just not cooperate and not listen. So we try to do these campaigns, we try to promote our advocacies with a more facilitative, inclusive approach, aligned with the principles of the Laudato Si.
Yeah, JL, there are so many people who are asking, why focus on faith communities? How would they influence like decision makers, policy makers? Why focus on their morals and beliefs, for example?
Yeah, as I mentioned, no, the climate crisis is rooted on, ultimately it boils down to our pursuit of development. But what influences mostly our pursuit of development? Sometimes it comes down to our behavior. Many people can get greedy. Many people can start to see our environment as something that's simply utilitarian, in such a way that when I see, for example, this tree, I don't see it as just a tree. I see it, at least as a climate advocate, I see it as an important part of nature. It has dignity, it has rights, it has value that goes beyond what that tree can provide for me when it comes to building my house, or when it comes to what fruits it can provide for me. And we try to tackle this, we try to use this approach wherein we try to communicate with decision makers, policy makers, through faith-based, moral lens, so to speak. Because ultimately, behavioral change should inspire change, the kind of change that we need. Behavioral change leads to systems change.
JL, one of the dilemmas, I think, would be, we have politicians, we have executives, we have business leaders, or say, like we have congresspersons, we have senators, we have secretaries of government departments and agencies. And these elected officials, they swore that they took their oath using the Bible, for example. And then every Sunday they go to church and meet people. And sometimes whenever they have speeches, like they wave the Bible and they say, God says in the Bible, and quoting chapter and verses of the Bible, then at the end of the day, they will always decide on, okay, this is good for our economy. We mind this and we mind that. We approve coal-fired power plants because it's needed for economy, and we approve this kind of franchise because they will help our people. At the end of the day, nature suffers. If nature is destroyed, their very constituents will suffer. How would Living Laudato Si Philippines address this? Like, we have people going to church, listening to the teachings, and they have their doctrines, they have their own proclaimed morals, but when they go back to the halls of Congress, to the halls of the Senate, and their offices in the government, they do otherwise.
That's a very difficult question to answer, quite frankly. And to be honest with you, of course you will know this as well. Here in LLS, we try to, again, as I mentioned earlier, we try not to antagonize people. Again, because we want to reach out to them, because we know that they have the resources, they have the influence, they have well, let's just get straight to the point. They have the power to make decisions that are necessary for improving the well-being of not just the people but also our environment. And by the way, sir, since you mentioned that nature always suffers, that's precisely the problem. I don't think that there should be a dichotomy between economic growth, social development, and environmental protection, because that is precisely the kind of thinking which unfortunately is continuing right now, that is causing all these problems that we're facing in the first place. Even COVID-19, it arguably traces its origins to environmental neglect and abuse. I don't think there's a dichotomy. And that's another problem that we probably need to approach with politicians, especially because at the end of the day, politicians, let's shoot straight from the hip, should we? They care more about their reputation and implementing short-term solutions when the problems that we're facing require long-term solutions. So in terms of our advocacy, one of the things that we can do, LLS or otherwise, is to communicate to these decision makers and policy makers that there is always a better way. And there is a way to do these long-term solutions without necessarily being impulsive. And I think one of the strategies that we can do is to ingrain a sense of value into the environment. And that's not necessarily mean that we should monetize the environment even more than we already do now. But I mean, we hear in our work, we hear stories of not just the sons and daughters of congressmen and senators, but even financial of the bigwigs, the tycoons. They hear their kids, who, by the way, study in universities as well, and these kids are becoming more, I hate to use this word, but I'm going to use it, woke, about the reality of our world. And they're asking their parents, why are you doing this? Shouldn't we change for the better? So we see that as an opportunity to change, the behavior of everyone. It's a ripple effect. And I think that's a good strategy as well.
And Living Laudato Si Philippines, of course, is engaging in that kind of strategies, and just to not to confront, but to engage and to have dialogue. And personally, like you, JL, and I, and everyone, our colleagues, are sometimes, we're having difficulty in engaging, but we have, principles, and we have guidance from what we believe in, right? And sa iyong advocacies and campaigns, mayroon ka mga pinaniniwalaang prinsipyo, tinatayuan, ipinaglalaban, and we wish to know your everyday mantra and learn from it dito sa #EarthLiners. Yes, we have so many motivations, JL. And with the engagements you have, siguro na-mention mo na kanina ito, ano yung pinaniniwalaan mong prinsipyo? O pag nandun ka na sa alanganin, lagi kang nagsasabi, JL, ito yung pinaniniwalaan mo. Sinasabi mo sa sarili mo, just go on, believe. What are those things that keep you moving?
Well, whenever I'm in doubt, I always try to remember what my Professor Nataneo said to me. And he said this to our class when we were graduating. And I think this was during our last definitely during our last few months, when we already finished and yay, we're celebrating and all that. But he said still the most influential thing that anyone has ever said to me in terms of my current work, and that is, you go where you're needed. And that sounds a very simple message, but in a world where many people tend to including ourselves, to be honest with you, sometimes or even most of the time act based on what they want to do than what they need to do. That statement, go where you are needed, is very challenging to fulfill every single time. And as I mentioned, the youth of today, they have so many options, they have so many resources, collectively speaking, and you can say the world's your oyster, you can say all those cliches, but it's the kind of work that it takes to have that sense of fulfillment, to know that you are doing something that's helping others. That's not an easy thing to do. And I would argue that I would argue that that helping others, sometimes even to your detriment, may be one of the most noble things that anyone can do. And in the case of climate change, environmental issues, we really need people to stand up and voice out their concern for the world. We know that the cries of the earth are getting louder and louder. Climate change, obviously, is the worst example of that. The cries of the poor are growing louder and louder, but someone needs to listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
Someone needs to take note that these cries actually exist, and these cries must be brought to the proper to the decision makers, to the policy makers, to businesses, so we can bridge that gap. And again, as you mentioned, sir, it's not the easiest work.
Mm-hmm. And in reaching out, JL, to those who are in need, there are so many challenges, hurdles. How did you address those? Like sometimes you know that they need help, but at the end they denied the kind of help that you are extending. And sometimes there are also hindrances for you to extend the help and reach out. What did you do? What is the most challenging situation, and what did you do?
Well, I've come into many cases the last couple of years, especially as the issues keep getting more complex. We get to hear more and more challenge issues that even arise. It's like almost it never ends. And you will always run into cases where you will have a difference of opinion with some people. And to be honest, I've been guilty of sometimes being a bit too firm with my principles in such a way that it turns people off.
Mm-hmm.
And in those cases, well, firstly, I try to, of course, take a few deep breaths first. Try to calm down and try to remember, again, you go where you're needed. This is what you need to do. You need to try to you need to try to reach out to people. You need to understand where they're coming from. You need to understand why their opinions are like this. Ano yung hugot nila, kumbaga. And then you try to have a conversation, a dialogue with them. And you try to, I don't want to say find a compromise, but you try to find that connection. You try to build that relationship. Not necessarily a romantic one, but just a relationship where you can have a sense of mutual understanding. And I think that's the most important step, perhaps. You need to build that connection. And we see all around us, and again, we're going back a little bit to the Laudato Si here. We're trying to build these relationships because our world, I think, has become more connected than ever, but somehow more disconnected than ever. And going back to the theme of interconnectedness po, no? Everything is interconnected, but somehow, what do you mean by interconnectedness of today? Are we talking about Facebook connections? Are we talking about social media connections? Are we talking about connections where you just see people in the street, you say hi, and then you feel good about yourself? We need to build relationships with other sectors, other communities that are genuine. May hugot. There's a commonality that you are working together towards a common goal. Basically, solidarity.
Mm-hmm. What is your advice to the young people, Filipino young, sa mga kabataan na gusto mag-engage sa ganitong trabaho na ginagawa natin, the passion that you have for the environment? What's your advice? Na gusto nila magsimulang mag-engage, gusto nila magsimulang mag-focus sa mga isyong pangkalikasan. What's your advice to them?
Go, just do it. That's the very first important step of any advocacy. You need to have passion. If you don't have passion for what you're campaigning for, what you're advocating for, then what are you doing there? You need to have passion for that first. But it is very important to note that this work is not going to be easy. Then again, nothing is. But this is definitely not easy. And this is not the kind of work where you can expect to be rich. It's not the kind of work where you expect to be famous. It's not the kind of work where you expect to have a lot of free time, glamour, and all that on your hands. This is work that is going to make you a lot of enemies, quite frankly. A couple of death threats even, if you're unlucky or lucky, depending on your philosophical perspective. But what matters, if you're going to this kind of work, you need to have to, okay, there you go. You need to have at least two components within you. The first is passion. Second is compassion. There you go. Sorry.
Passion and
compassion.
Compassion. Great. And sometimes, JL, dahil sa dinami-dami mong ginagawa, we also have some days off.
Oh, yeah.
Matapos na feeling mo burnout ka na, etc. So we stop, we reflect, and 3, 2, 1, pause and post. So we got you dito sa hashtag EarthGlams.
EarthGlams.
Pasensya na, JL, pero dahil naka-public post yung mga ito, we grabbed photos from your Facebook profile page, and we just wanted to ask some questions on this photo, which I think public photos that are from Facebook or from Google, for example, which will actually tell something about you and about what you do whenever you have free time, for example, or perhaps at work, after you work, then business, then you have free time to, just to roam around. So we got you dito sa first photo na to, and tell us something about this. Yes. This JL, tell us something about this photo. Where is this? And parang autumn ito, no? Yeah.
I'm shocked. I didn't expect this at all, to be honest with you. Oh my God. Yeah, this was in November 2007. We were in Bonn, Germany, I think. Yeah, we were in Bonn for the COP23 in and this was my first. This was near the end of my first COP, and I really had a wonderful time. Learned a lot. I was a bit overwhelmed, to be honest, because it's COP. There are lots of things going on. There are thousands of people there. This was near the end. I think this was actually on the last day of COP. And we went outside the conference venue along with my work colleagues, among others, and we just found this beautiful scenery just outside the venue. I mean, it was November, and part of me was expecting snow. I was naive. I just want to see snow, man. But yeah, we saw it. Being Filipinos, hey, let's have pictures because it kind of looks like in Korea, even though it's not. So yeah, that was near the end of COP. It was fun.
What makes this photo memorable?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it was the end of my first COP, and
as the conference of parties, no?
Yes. Sorry. Yeah. UN Climate Conference. There you go. Learned a lot, and again, to me, when I saw those trees, I don't usually associate. Well, I'm the kind of person that normally associates, believes in destiny and all that. But when I just saw the trees, I just felt relaxed. It's calming. It's refreshing, quite frankly, to see that, because you never see that in the Philippines. And when I saw it, I was just enamored by how it looks. Again, it reminded me of Korean novellas. I watch K-pop. I watch Korean novellas sometimes.
Yeah.
And again, to me, it shows me how beautiful nature can be and its endless wonders. And seeing that photo now makes me just miss it again, because obviously with the lockdown and all that, we still can't really see anything else.
Yeah, but the message is really appreciating nature, reconnecting, and that gives you comfort. Well, from Germany, we go to the Philippines, and let's look at this photo.
What is this? Jeez. Oh my God.
Barangay, mga kapuso, kung hindi nyo alam, siya po yung mag-isang nagprotesta sa libingan ng mga bayani noong 16, no? Akala niya ay maraming pumunta at siya lang yung nagpapagwa. So, but anyway, tell us the story of this photo. Paano ka nag-end up dyan sa libingan ng mga bayani?
I really did not expect this tonight. I'm gonna tell you that. But yeah, this was during the time of the first few months of the Duterte presidency, and we were all, of course, a lot of us were thinking that this guy again, the former president, should not be buried there because, well, quite frankly, he's not a hero. It says right there in my placard, if Marco is not a hero, then I'd rather be a villain. And in the eyes of the trolls that I have interacted since, and those who gave me death threats, I may be a villain. But like I said, there are sides to every story, and my side is this. During this time, I was taking my master's in Ateneo, and again, I was a bit out of the loop of what's going on around me because it was our what do you call this? Comprehensive exam. So I really need to buckle down and focus and all that. And on this day was the last day of the comprehensive exam, so I can finally just do this. And as you said, sir, there was a colleague who invited me to go there because apparently there was going to be a mass rally, and I was ready. Like as soon as I finished my comprehensive exam, I put my pen down and I walked out with swagger and all that because I was motivated. I was pumped up to join the fray, so to speak. And then when I arrived at Libingan ng mga Bayani, all I saw was probably more than probably 24 policemen, a couple of reporters, and what looks like a mob of Marcos loyalists. And at that moment, of course, I was worried about, if I do this, I'm going to get shot. If I do this, I'm going to get shot. I'm going to get red tagged. I'm going to get all of these things that my family don't want to happen to me.
Mm.
But then I realized that this is just the first 6 months of the presidency. I mean, 5 years later, we're still, actually 4 years later, it almost feels like 5 years already, even though it's only 4. But at that point, I realized I need to do this because this needs to be done. This is what's right. This is not just for our history, it's also for justice. And it's simply about doing what's right. It's about standing up for something you believe in. So I just raised up the placard. Coincidentally, I was wearing a House Start shirt for some reason. Feels more empowering, quite frankly. And yeah, I stood just doing this for like the next 20-30 minutes straight, no words whatsoever. I was just waiting for a gunshot or something, or a mob to stampede me all the way to wherever. I did a couple of interviews right after. I went home, then I walked away. I went home, saw the news, saw many messages on Facebook. I get a couple of death threats. Cool, I got death threats. And also not cool, I got death threats. And yeah, it's probably one of the coolest things I've ever done in a weird way, quite frankly. But definitely, I do not regret doing that at all, looking back, because just look at where we are now, quite frankly.
All right. Maririnig pa namin si JL sa kanyang mga issues and concerns, sa kanyang mga insights. Dahil, of course, sa kanya, marami tayong matututunan at dapat pagkilusan, our hopes and dreams need action. At syempre tulad ni JL, sa mga kabataan, hey, hindi ka na ang kinabukasan dahil ikaw na ang ngayon na humuhubog sa iyong hinaharap. Para sa iyo, sa iyong family, friends, and communities, at sa buong ecosystem. And si JL po, yung Program Manager ng Living Laudato Si Philippines, surprise! Mayroon po tayong bagong segment sa ngayon. Isang mabilisang take sa mga trending at mahalagang usapin sa linggong ito. So we talk about our planet, the Earth. And if we talk about our planet, it's not only about the birds and the bees, but also our relationship with them and our relationship with our fellow human beings, with the society. Kaya, magkakaroon po tayo ng kasama every Wednesday. Kasama natin si JL dito sa hashtag Quick Takes. So, dito sa hashtag Quick Takes, ibibigay ko ang segment na to for about 5 minutes kay JL to talk about trending issues and concerns. So, JL, take it.
All right, thank you, Sir Rodney. And for this week's hashtag Quick Takes, I would like to briefly discuss with everyone here the concept of advocacy. Since we are talking about advocacy for the last around half of the last hour now, and quite frankly, we have been hearing that term advocacy a lot lately, specifically with the issue of Facebook taking down 2 large networks of accounts and pages. One of them being based apparently in China, and one of them apparently being based here in the Philippines. And unfortunately, according to Facebook, they are connected to certain members of the Philippine military and police. And interestingly enough, these networks have been connected to messages of concerning global issues that are relevant to the Philippine setting, including the South China Sea issue, and of course, messages supporting the current Duterte administration. And of course, naturally, President Duterte, he basically denounced this move by Facebook, almost claiming that he's going to shut down Facebook access in the Philippines. And I think he stated as well that these pages and accounts that are taken down, they're simply for advocacy. Remember that word, advocacy. Of course, in relation to that, certain allies of the president has also denounced this move, and they wanted an investigation to be conducted in the Senate specifically to examine why these so-called, let me just do this, advocacy pages and were taken down. And of course, Facebook has already gone on record to explain that they took down these networks of accounts and pages because they were intentionally misleading the other Facebook users when it comes to who controls and who owns these pages. In relation to that, we also recently heard of a news about the intelligence chief in the Philippines, who apparently is also spreading fake news in his social media accounts. And he explained that this kind of posting is simply an artistic expression. Now, obviously, I'm wearing glasses, which means my eyesight's not exactly that good anymore. But I believe that, with all due respect, sir, Mr. Monteagudo, you might need to get your eyes checked as well, because as far as we remember, you are the chief of NICA, not NCCA, National Commission of Culture and the Arts. See, letter C and letter I, they are completely different. But let me get back to my original point. See, is it really advocacy if it's done in the service of spreading fake news? Is it really advocacy if it's done through means that are dishonest and misleading? Is that really what advocacy should be about? Well, I don't think advocacy should be done through those kinds of means, because advocacy at the end of the day is an activity or an action that individuals or organizations can do to influence a particular political, social, economic, or environmental issue. And having been a climate advocate myself for the last couple of years, and sharing the thoughts of many others here in the Philippines and around the world, advocacy should not be used to advance the vested interests of certain people who probably have way too much power and wealth already to begin with. Advocacy should be done to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Advocacies exist specifically because there is not enough attention being placed on a certain issue that needs attention in the first place. Hence, climate advocacy, environmental advocacy, advocacy for social justice, among many other things. And there are many ways you can do, you can promote your advocacy. And listen, it's okay for us to support someone. There's nothing wrong with that. You can support a certain politician. You can advocate for a certain cause, as long as it's not crossing any lines, of course. If it's a reasonable advocacy, it's fine. That's not the issue here. The issue here is the means by which the advocacy is being done. It's misleading, it's dishonest, and that should be the focus. Because I agree with this particular senator who suggested there should be investigations. There should be investigations about why these advocacies were taken down. But the angle should not be that these pages being taken down are focused on, Facebook being anti-Duterte government. It should be on why there are certain elements of the Philippine police, military, and all that who are connected to these kinds of illegal activities, quite frankly. And the same principles for advocacy apply to those who are promoting climate denial. These guys who are promoting fossil fuels, coal, look, if that's what you believe in, that's fine. But if you are falsifying information, if you're claiming things that are not true, then that's not true advocacy. That's just being selfish. And that is the complete opposite of what advocacy in its deepest core should be about. And that is, advocacy should be for improving the well-being, the lives of not just the people, but also the planet. And not just current generations, but also future generations. So, as I mentioned earlier, advocacy should have passion and compassion. And any kind of dishonest, misleading methods of advocacy has no compassion whatsoever. That is my quick take of the week. Back to you, Sir Rodney.
Well, that is just a taste of our new segment, hashtag Quick Takes with JL. And one of the advocacies through advocacies of Quarant Talk Media. So we need to actually inform you of the real situation of the pandemic, because this quarantine media is all about primarily while we are under quarantine. Quarantine media was actually created, and now we are getting bigger and bigger. But going back to that, let's look at the latest news about COVID-19 pandemic in the Philippines. Right, and I think JL can help me with this. So as of October 7, 2020, today, COVID-19 cases in the Philippines, the total cases, active cases, JL, ilan na yung active cases natin sa ngayon?
Ooh, that's a lot. Almost 50,000. 49,989. That's a lot of active cases.
49,989. And today we have how many cases reported?
I believe it's 2,825 cases have been added, and now we are almost close to 330,000 cases.
329,637. And we have an additional 60 deaths reported, total death of 5,925. And of course, we have how many recoveries today?
437.
And
That's
the
good news,
total of-
definitely.
Yeah, the total of-
273,723.
Yes. Wow. And that is brought to you by the Department of Health of the Republic of the Philippines. And of course, almost every day, mayroon po tayo mga programa dito sa Quarant Talk Media. Mondays, 9 p.m. Quarant Talk with Jules Giang and Antonio. Of course, Tuesdays, 9 p.m., the main agenda with Ate May, Jermaine Halandon and Derunia. Wednesday, 7 p.m., Kilos Kabataan with Jules. And of course, 9 p.m., QT Earth with yours truly, of course. And then Thursdays, 9 p.m., Throwback Kasaysayan with Professor Francisco Jamie Giang, Professor Gio. 10:30, E. Newman with Thais and Rafi, with Thais Estrada and Rafi Magno. Fridays, 9 p.m., SDG Online Combined with 2030 Youth Force in the Philippines Incorporated. And every Sunday, wow, we have Comelec Radio and online talk show, discuss about the upcoming elections. Handog ito sa inyo ng Quarant Talk Media, empowering the Filipino, inspiring action, serving the people. Dito sa hashtag QT Earth, everything matters, dahil ang lahat ay magkaugnay, hindi magkakahiwalay, dahil ang ating buhay, kalikasan ang pinagmulan at pinagkukunan ng ating kabuhayan. Tayo at ang kapaligiran ay isa, tayo ay kalikasan. Tayo at ang kapaligiran, of course, undeniably, we are nature. And right now, mayroon lang po tayong quotation from Laudato Si on Care for Our Common Home ni Pope Francis. Ito po yung kanyang encyclical na tungkol sa hindi lamang tungkol sa kalikasan, kundi tungkol sa social issues and in relation, of course, sa ating environment. At sa ngayon po, tulutan niyo akong basahin yung kanyang isa sa mga paragraphs dito sa kanyang liham encyclical. Laudato Si, number 213. Ecological education can take place in a variety of settings. At school, in families, in the media, in catechesis, and elsewhere. Good education plants seeds when we are young, and these continue to bear fruit throughout life. And that is a quote from Laudato Si number 213 ni Pope Francis. At ako po ang inyong lingkod at kaugnay, face-to-face at sa social media, Kalikasan 101. You may visit my website, www.rodgalicha.com at ang www.livinglaudatosI.org.ph. Kasama po ngayon si JL dito sa hashtag
QT Earth.
Hashtag we are
nature.
Magandang gabi at see you on Wednesday. Mabuhay ang Pilipinas. Maraming salamat, JL. See you on Wednesday.
Mabuhay!